the reason why John calls the miracles in his gospel signs, because they weren't just acts of compassion, though they were acts of compassion. They weren't just random acts of kindness for people, though they were kind acts. They were meant to demonstrate and to testify of who it was that was walking among them. That he wasn't just a prophet, he wasn't just a teacher, that he was God come in human flesh. He did the things that only God can do. He healed the lame man. He forgave sin. He raised the dead. The things that only God could do. And these were all testifying of his deity and of who he actually was. And also they all pointed to why he came. He came to set at liberty those who were enslaved. He came to free us from the things that brought us into bondage. He came to free us from our fears. He came to free us from all the ramifications of living in a sinful world and being sinful people. And all those ramifications that go along with that. Jesus came by his power to redeem us, to bring us into a new citizenship, and to begin that work in us, that transforming work in us that would make us absolutely different from the way we used to be. In this particular miracle, he was providing. He was providing for these people who were in a place where they had no food. They were hungry. They were exhausted. They had no options. They couldn't buy enough food to feed them. Jesus miraculously provides for them. And in a sense, when you think of the loaves being distributed and the fish being distributed, each piece, each crumb really spoke of God's abundant provision for us. No matter how small or how big, whether it was just a crumb, whether it was a whole piece of loaf of bread, it all spoke of God's provision and God's heart for these people and for you and I. So in a sense, when we read this story, there's something of this story that causes us to, maybe where we're at right now, maybe whatever we're going through right now, it's a challenge to kind of take our gaze off of the things that are consuming us. Maybe an area of great need. Maybe we're facing a lack of something that we don't know where the provision is going to come from. And it's a call really to take our eyes off of the scarcity of our situation and to get our eyes on God, who is the provider, the sovereign provider of every one of us. He is a faithful and abundant provider. I just want to go over this story with you, and I want to touch on 3 faith lessons that I think are woven throughout this story that I think we can actually walk away with here this morning. 3 things that we can walk away with. Let's just get into it. So faith lesson number 1 is the lesson of the need for us to come to our own limitations. Coming to our own limitations. In John chapter 6, verse 5, it says this: "When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy food for these people to eat?' He asked this only to test him, for he'd already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered, 'It would take more than a half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one just to have a little bite.'" First faith lesson in this one is coming to our own limitations. Faith, in a sense, is most needed, when we finally come to the edge of our own limitations. When we've got things in hand and we've already got how to do certain things and got things figured out, there really isn't a great need for faith at that moment. We just kind of go into function. This is what I do. I've done this many times. But when we come to the end of that, that's when faith is required. And I believe that God allows situations that expose our limitations. I think God not only allows situations to expose our limitations, I think he designs situations purposefully to bring us to the point where we're completely limited. It's in these moments where faith is tested, and it's a place where our capacities come to an end, but it's also the place where God can then begin to step in to our situation. Think about this situation. This situation was a logistical nightmare. We didn't really get into the first few verses of this passage, but what has happened is they have been, like I said, the other Gospels have all shared this story, and they've shared different parts of this story. Well, Matthew and Mark and Luke all share specifically when this happened. This happened after John the Baptist had already been arrested and beheaded. That was hugely significant among these early believers. The prophet the one who pointed to Jesus as the Lamb of God, the voice of one calling in the wilderness, now was thrown into prison and he was beheaded in over an unjust circumstance. It certainly must have been shocking and really just would have reverberated a lot of uncertainty among these early believers. Also, before this happened, we're told in Matthew and Mark, Jesus had already sent out the 12 disciples on a short-term mission adventure. He said, I'm going to send you out in the local villages and you're going to have power to heal the sick. You're going to have power to cast out demons. You're going to have power over diseases. And I want you to proclaim the message of the gospel of the kingdom. So he had sent them out. They had been serving. They had gotten a taste of kind of what their future was going to look like as followers of Jesus. And they probably came back with all kinds of stories and probably a little excitement of seeing God's power working through them. And they had all come back together. And it says in Matthew and Mark, it says that they were exhausted. They were depleted. They were exhausted. And Jesus, the reason why he took them to this area of Galilee was he wanted to get them alone to kind of have some downtime, to draw away from the crowds. Because what had happened is Jesus, as he was performing miracles and as now his disciples were performing miracles, the crowds were swelling with excitement. So Jesus was trying to draw them away to get just a little retreat time. Catch your breath. Let's kind of talk about, let's debrief what's been going on, kind of get your energy back. But the crowds wouldn't let them do that. Jesus looks up and the crowds are still there and they're following them. And really, as we're going to see, chapter 6 is the height of Jesus' popularity. This is the height of all the buzz. This is the height of all the excitement, of all the attention. This is the moment. This is the situation. Now think about it. These disciples, they're probably mentally and physically spent. They're in a barren place. There's no 7-Elevens. There's no drive-through, Chick-fil-A's. They have depleted resources. They have empty stomachs. I don't know if you've ever been hangry. I get hangry. You get hungry and you get a little edgy and you want it now. You can imagine a crowd of thousands of people with hanger. And then you got the disciples who are extra hangry because they're just exhausted from ministry. And now all these people that are kind of probably bugging them a little bit. Like, guys, just go away. We just need some downtime. This was a perfect scenario for just a total meltdown. I mean, let's be human about this. You would just be ready for a meltdown. You're ready to lose your patience, just tell people to take a hike. But of course, Jesus had something else in mind. And, I think about having such a great little gathering here this morning. Could you imagine if next Sunday, we get 100 people show up, and then another 100, and then we're so stacked up in here, I got no place to stand, and we're full, and then the front of the house is full of people, and there's people in the streets. Say we get a couple of thousand people here next week, and we don't have enough coffee, don't have enough water, don't have enough sodas. By the way, who's bringing hospitality next week? The point is, it was an unforeseen and really an impossible scenario of trying to meet this need. Literally, Jesus was allowing these disciples to experience coming to the utter end of their limitation. There was nothing they could do. The need was so big. Jesus he knows what he's going to do. He knows he's going to perform a miracle, but he chooses to set it up by asking a question. And he asks it to Philip. He says to Philip, hey, Philip, where are we going to buy enough food to feed these people? Now, we've talked about this before, but we know Jesus never asks questions in order to find out information that he doesn't already have. He asks questions to search us out, for us to discover what's in us. He asks questions to expose the heart. He asks questions to test our faith. He basically wants to bring to the surface what he knows is already here, but he wants to bring it out so then he can address it. And here he says to Philip, hey, where can we buy enough food for all this? And so he's testing he's testing Philip. Obviously, it's an impossible situation. And Philip realizes this. And Philip says, even if we bought enough Even if we had half of a year's wage, we could not buy enough food. We could buy maybe a bit for everyone to have a little taste, a little morsel. It says specifically, when John records this, he says, Jesus said this to test them, to test them. The word test, parazo, is an interesting word in the New Testament because it has a wide range of implications. It can mean, in a negative sense, to tempt somebody, to try and get them to do something. But it also can be used in a very positive sense, in which it's used to maybe prove something that's already there, or to bring something into light, like an exam, a test. Negatively, when Jesus was led into the wilderness, it says he was to be tempted by Satan. That's the word, parazo. Satan meant that for bad, for evil. He wanted to tear Jesus down. He wanted to circumvent his ministry. But the same word is used for God in our lives. James 1, chapter 1, verse 2 and 3 says, "Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing, the parazo of your faith, produces perseverance." And then he goes on to say, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the parazo, the test, that person will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised those who love him." The point is that this word test, the nature of it's determined by who's doing the testing. If Satan's doing the testing, he means it to tear you down. He means it to defeat you. He means it to strip away your confidence and to be overwhelmed with a sense of failure. But when God uses it, he means it just the opposite. He means it not to tear you down, but to build you up, to increase your faith. Jesus brought this test to his disciples for the end result of increasing their faith in him and in his power. And so in this test, it's an invitation to Philip. He's wanting to invite Philip to recognize, first of all, there is no other answer outside of a miraculous thing right now. He's bringing all the disciples to the point of their limitation so that he can step in and once again glorify himself and point them to his ability and increase their faith. In fact, the Bible says that without these tests, our faith actually will never come to full maturity. It's absolutely necessary for us to go through these tests. It's absolutely necessary for us to come to moments where we have come to the end of ourself, and then we see God's faithfulness. And then when we see God doing something we could not do, we can see an answer that we didn't foresee coming. We experience provision that we had no way of creating by ourselves. And in those moments of God proving his faithfulness, he is maturing our faith. He's getting us to more deeply invest in trusting him and his provision. And how, Philip really kind of mirrors so much of our experience, right? We'll tend to come into a situation where it's really trying and troubling. We'll take inventory and we realize we're coming up short. Don't have enough finances. Don't have enough physical energy. Don't have the skill set. I don't have the wisdom. I don't have the know-how. I don't have the expertise. And then Paul reminds us in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, he testifies what the Lord told him in a similar circumstance. When Paul said, "The Lord told me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness." When you are limited, when you are out of resource, I am not limited. My grace is sufficient. And God continues to bring us to the end of our own resources so that we might really wholly lean upon him. Listen, the feeling of being overwhelmed when we come into these things is not a sign of failure. Being overwhelmed is not a sign of failure. The enemy loves to pile on us when we feel overwhelmed. He loves to come in and say, "Well, how could you be overwhelmed? I thought you believed in God. I thought you trusted God." The accuser of the brethren. He will come in when we are overwhelmed. But the Bible doesn't say being overwhelmed is a failure. In fact, it's the indication that you're being tested. It's the indication that God is bringing you into a parazo. And why is God bringing you into a testing? We already read it. To increase your faith. God is for you. God wants to build you up. So when you come to the place where you're overwhelmed, God is testing me. God's intention for this testing is not to tear me down, but to build me up and to build up my faith. And it may be the very moment that is a threshold of God performing a miracle. It may be the very threshold that God is intentionally removing all your options so he can show up in his faithfulness and his provision in a way that you would not be looking for, you would not be asking for, you would not be expecting, until he brought you to the end and you got no way out. And then he comes through. That's why James says, hey, rejoice when you're being tested in various ways. God's going to come through. God is faithful. Right now, it doesn't feel good, but in the end, God is going to prove his faithfulness. After this first point of God, of coming to our own limitations as a lesson of faith from this story, I want to give just a couple in each of these points, just maybe a faith-building application for us. And under this first one, I would just say this. Faith begins when we're willing to make an honest assessment of ourselves. As long as we kind of live in the denial that we've got everything handled, we kind of shield ourselves from experiencing God's miracles and God's faithfulness. And listen, there is something about the humble confession that in and of itself strengthens your faith. The honesty, the verbalizing before God, God, I am out of options here. God, I don't know where the money's going to come from. God, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. I don't know how to take care of this problem. In that humble confession, even in that humble confession, there's a strengthening of your faith. Because why? Because it's a redirecting of admitting you don't have the resource, and it's a redirection to the one who does have all the resource. In that simple act of humbling yourself before God, confessing, God, I'm at the end of myself. It is that threshold of inviting God to do something you can't do. Name our need. God, I don't have the finances for this. I don't have the energy for this. I don't have the answers to this problem. I don't have the wisdom for this. I don't know how to fix this relationship. It's gotten so broken in so many layers, I don't even know where to begin. So name your need and then confess your fear. Lord, I am afraid. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling anxious. And then trust that he has already got a plan before you even utter those words. This is not faithlessness. This is not faithlessness. This is literally the starting point of faith, of simply coming to our limitation. So brings us to the second faith lesson, which is offer what you do have. In verse 8, one of the other disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. How will they go among so many? It's interesting. Philip was completely stuck. Saw the need. He just goes, hey man, even if I had a great savings of my last year's wages, I could only buy a morsel for each person. So he was completely stuck. Andrew had a little more of a hesitant faith. He was trying to solve the problem a little bit. He looks around, he sees this kid with 5 barley loaves and a couple of fish, and he just brought it up to Jesus. Hey, I know this isn't going to help, but we do have this. And it's interesting because he had no confidence. He had no confidence they could solve the problem, but he was willing to bring it to Jesus anyways. And that's really what this second faith lesson is about. God uses small offerings to accomplish great things. Over and over again, we've experienced it in our lives. We hear it in the testimony of men and women of Christ, whether they're missionaries or whether in different circumstances, situations. We see the testimony over and over again. They've offered the little they had, and God multiplied it. He's not demanding resources from you that you don't have. He's asking for obedience with what you do have. Like I said, Andrew's faith was hesitant, yet he presented the offering to Jesus with no confidence that it could solve the problem. But he brought it to Jesus anyway. And that is the key thing here. His doubt, his sense of being overwhelmed by the situation, the mingling of unbelief, disbelief, unable to see how this could help out with such a meager offering. And yet, what do we know about the story? That meager offering that he was at least willing to suggest to Jesus, that became the material, the raw material for the miracle itself. Could Jesus have just boom, snapped and manna fell from heaven like it did with Moses? And the bread and the fish could have flown from the sky and fed everyone. He could have done that. But Jesus chose to not only test his disciples, but then utilize whatever they found that they had to be incorporated as the raw material for which God was going to then multiply to meet these people's needs. Our end point is God's beginning point, but he calls us to participate in his faithfulness in our lives. There's a call for you and I to participate with him. Could he just do it all himself without participating? Yes, but God has chosen to do work in our lives in such a way as Christians as he calls us to give him an offering. Offering, remember Romans 12:1. Offer yourself a sacrifice. Offer who you are. Offer what you have to him. It's the act of obedience. It's the act of offering. It's the act of surrender. It's not about he needs what you have. He's looking for the act of faith and obedience and surrender to him by saying, God, I don't have enough money to get my car fixed, but all I've got is this $20. When I touch on this, I just have to say a disclaimer here. I understand that what I'm saying right now has been deeply, profoundly abused in the church. When we think of the faith movement, where a minister or pastor or ministry says, hey, bring me your last dollar and God will bless you. Please note, that's not where I'm going. The principle here is you give to God what you have. And I don't even mean it has to leave your pocket. I'm just saying you're acknowledging, God, this is what I have, and I need you to multiply it. I need you to bless it. I want to give you this quote because, man, this is so good here. James Montgomery Boyce, theologian, author, he made this comment. I think this is so good. He said, the miracle of the loaves and the fishes getting multiplied, it didn't happen while the loaves and fishes were still in the boy's basket. The miracle didn't happen when the loaves and the fishes were still in Andrew's hand. The miracle took place when the loaves and fish were placed into Jesus' hand. That's the point. But the point is, in our participation in seeing God's provision and faithfulness, we are called, whatever loaves and fishes we have that are completely unable to meet the need, but we offer it to the Lord. How about in the area of your service? Lord, I'm not an evangelist, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. Well, what has God given you to do? What has God given you to do? And what small offering can you give to God that God could use and multiply for his kingdom? This isn't just, money. This is time. This is resource. This is opportunities. What loaves and fishes can you give to God that you realize, you may think, God, what could I contribute to the kingdom? What could I contribute to helping somebody? What could I contribute? Me just offering to pray for someone's need over the prayer chain that just seems so overwhelming. What good is my, few minutes of prayer going to do? But that's what this is teaching us. God takes the small offerings and he does great things and he multiplies it. You put it into his hands. You give the needs into Jesus' hands and let him multiply, let him bless, let him bring forth the miracle. You don't have to perform the miracle, but put it into his hands so he can bless the loaves and he can bless the fish. Because when we refuse to, we may never see the multiplication. We may never see the blessing. We may never see the miracle that God could do because we just are going to sit on it. Here's the faith-building application for this second point. Simply identify. Be willing to take a little bit of inventory of what you do have. Lord, I know this person's they're battling cancer. So overwhelming to even think about, what can I do? What do I have to offer? Well, I could maybe make them a meal. I could offer to keep them in prayer. I could simply ask them, hey, is there anything can I go to the grocery store for you? I can do some simple act that is something that God could bless and multiply and really bring about, even showing his own faithfulness to this person. We get overwhelmed with needs so easily. I do. You hear needs and you just go, oh, gosh, Lord. But there is something we can do. We can just say, Lord, what can I do? What offering do I have? What can I do? Here it is, and I place it in your hands, and you show me and you direct me how you can use me, or how you can use the little that I have to bring about your blessing for your glory, for your name's sake. The first lesson is coming to our own limitations. Second is offering to him what we do have. And third faith lesson is trusting in his faithful provision. In verse 10, Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down, and about 5,000 men were there. Jesus then stood, took the loaves, gave thanks, distributed those who were seated to as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish, and they all had enough to eat. He said to his disciples, "Now go gather the pieces left over. Let nothing be wasted." So they gathered and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of barley loaves left over from those who had eaten. The third faith lesson from the story is you and I are invited to place our trust in his faithful provision. Each time you and I are out there in the wilderness with spiritual empty stomachs and feeling overwhelmed, the lesson from this story is the unwavering faithfulness of God. He is our provider. And what God desires most is for us to continually experience that in a way that deepens our relationship, deepens our dependency, deepens our trust, and deepens our faith. God's provision is always sufficient. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. God's provision may not always come the way that we think it's going to come or want it to come. These people that were sitting out there on that were hungry and thirsty, they may have been sick of barley bread and fish. Maybe they wanted somebody to do an in and out run. Nevertheless, God provided for their need, and abundantly, because it said they all had as much as they could eat. They were full. It speaks of God's abundance. Philippians 4:19, "My God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus." That's a promise. That's a promise. The point, once again, is not the miraculous act per se, but that Jesus is the one who's abundantly providing for these people's needs. And that's what Jesus wanted his disciples to get. Jesus wanted these disciples to be so deeply affected by this whole experience that this would be a story they would never forget. They would probably come into play many, many times over in their lives. Even after Jesus rose from the dead, God will supply our needs. I saw what he did. I saw what he did in that barren place with those thousands of people. I saw how he took the little that we had and he made it enough. Matthew and Mark tell us something else that John doesn't. It says when he saw the crowds coming to them, he didn't get irritated. He didn't just go, "Hey, leave us alone for a little bit. Give us a break." It says Jesus was filled with compassion because he said he saw these people like sheep without a shepherd. That's what he was teaching his disciples. I know you're overwhelmed by the people coming to you with need. I'm the one that's going to supply it. You just need to give what you can. You need to be available. And then let me supply through you. Let me bless them through you. And see them the way I see them. Don't see them as a bother. See them with the eyes of my compassion. He is our provision. Psalm 73:26. "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." Lamentations 3:24. "The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will place my hope in him." It's interesting when you think about the abundance of the leftovers. That specifically, it was 12 baskets of fragments and leftovers. They were baskets for each of the 12 disciples. Maybe it was Jesus is saying, "Hey, not only am I going to supply all their needs, but I'm going to have enough. I'm going to take care of you guys too." I think it just simply speaks of his abundance. The leftovers just testify of his generosity, even to those who were serving him. 2 Corinthians 9:8. "And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you may abound in every good work." It's really, this story is a lesson about having a divine perspective of earthly challenges. Sometimes we come into things that loom larger than us. We come into circumstances that outweigh our ability to get through them. We don't have the resources. We don't have the ability. We can't figure out a way to get out of a complex problem. We are little people in a big world. And to make things worse, we tend to view everything in a very horizontal way. But the challenge that Jesus continued to challenge his disciples with was to look at things differently, look at it vertically. Look at how God inserts himself into our everyday life. There's a quote here I have by a guy by the name of John Stott. And I want to recommend this simple, it's not a very big book, but it's called Basic Christianity, John Stott. And if you're looking for some good reading. But he says in this, faith is a reasoning trust, a trust that reckons thoughtfully and confidently upon the trustworthiness of God. When we're talking about trusting God's provision, it's not just some blind leap into just positive thinking. It's literally a thoughtfulness of reasoning of what he has done, what he has already proven. And so my reasoning to now trust in his faithfulness is based upon his record of faithfulness. This isn't a blind leap. I'm putting my confidence in something that has been witnessed and proven time and time again. Jesus, of course, confronted throughout his earthly ministry the Jews who chose not to believe him, who rejected him, who were very aware of who he claimed to be. There was no mystery about that. In fact, that's the very reason why they rejected him, because he claimed to be the Son of God. He claimed to be one with the Father. And he dealt with that accordingly. He condemned it. He also dealt with another problem. He also was constantly dealing with an imperfect faith of his followers. It's not the same thing. Unbelief and imperfect faith are two different things. And he dealt with both accordingly. He was constantly dealing with the imperfect faith of his followers who they didn't understand everything. They didn't always get everything. They didn't always jump on board and take him at his word. They struggled at times. And he patiently continued to teach them. He patiently continued to train them through with examples, performing miracles, teaching them, showing them what he was doing, in order that he could ultimately transform their doubtful minds into a place of full confidence in him. He was moving them to a mature faith, but they were constantly struggling with imperfect faith. He didn't rebuke them. He didn't condemn them. He was constantly looking for opportunities in situations to show them who he was and to keep proving who he was and to keep reinforcing the things that he already taught them. That's why I think we can kind of be unfair sometimes when we look at the disciples. We can kind of be unfair when we look at their responses to things and how they react, and especially with Peter. Like, for instance, here, what Jesus had already turned the water into wine, okay? He already healed the man that was lame for 38 years. He already raised the young servant on her deathbed. He had done a number of miracles. And he had given them the faith and the anointing to pray for healing themselves. This is all past. And suddenly come to this place where all these people are hungry, they don't have enough food. And you thought, well, Jesus, you can just clap your hands and the manna will fall from heaven. I mean, you turn water into wine, you can bring bread down from heaven. And so we can look at the disciples and go, why? They still didn't get it. He's performing all these miracles. But I think it's being too hard on them because they're in the same process we are walking in. Because honestly, same thing could be said of me and you. How many times has God faithfully proven himself committed to you through bringing provision, bringing what you need, answering prayer, and yet the moment we step out of here and we're faced with a new problem, we go right to anxiety. We go right to like, well, I know he did this in the past, but how is he going to do this? It's like, well, we're kind of like just the disciples. We should be so hard on them because we all have imperfect faith. But what God is continuing to do is to bring us to our own limitations, continuing to bring us through tests in order to bring our faith to maturity. And the most important lesson out of this whole story is simply the lesson of an ever ongoing and deepening trust in God's faithfulness as our provider. That is the ultimate lesson from this story. Psalm 36, verse 5. Your love, Lord, reaches to the heavens and your faithfulness to the skies. Psalm 91, verse 4. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and your protective wall. Someone said this, and I would quote them, but I don't know who said it. Fear is what if, and faith is even if. Fear is what if. Well, what if this happens? Then what are we going to do? And faith is, well, even if that happens, it doesn't change God's faithfulness. It doesn't change God's promises. It doesn't change God's commitment. Cast all your anxiety upon him, for he cares for you. So the third kind of a faith-building application as we conclude here. I guess I would call it a faithfulness journal. We should also count and make note of all the evidence of every time God was faithful to us. Small blessings, small ways, large ways. Faithfulness journal to remind us as God continues to teach us, knowing that we will continue to go through tests. He will continue to bring us to our limitations. But the more times we do that, and the more times we can look back on and go, yeah, I was at the end of myself there and there and there, and yet He proved Himself faithful. Lord Jesus, strengthen my heart. Though my heart and my flesh may fail, You're the strength of my life.